I still remember the exact moment my family decided I was no longer worth keeping around. It happened on a cold Thursday evening in October, 3 weeks after I lost my job. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread. My mother had set the table with her expensive china, the kind she only used when my older brother Ethan and his wife came over. My younger sister Madison was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention to anyone. Dad sat at the head of the table, checking emails on his tablet between bites, and then there was me, 32 years old, unemployed, broke, and apparently the biggest disappointment in the family. I had spent the previous 7 years working for a logistics company. I wasn't rich, but I paid my bills, rented a small apartment, and stayed out of trouble. Then the company downsized. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs overnight, including me. At first, I thought I'd bounce back quickly. I had savings, I had experience, I had confidence. But after dozens of applications and countless interviews, the savings disappeared faster than I expected. The apartment went first, then my car. Finally, with nowhere else to go, I moved into my parents' house temporarily. That was supposed to last a few weeks. Instead, it became the worst mistake of my life. "You've been here almost 2 months," Ethan said suddenly. I looked up. "What? You heard me." His tone carried the familiar arrogance he'd had since childhood. "You can't live off mom and dad forever." "I know that. Do you?" The room grew quiet. My mother lowered her eyes. Dad continued eating. Nobody defended me. I swallowed hard. "I've been applying every day," Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. "Applying isn't working, is it?" Something inside me tightened. Before I could respond, Madison joined in. "Honestly, it's depressing." I stared at her. "What is?" "You sitting around the house all day." "I don't sit around all day." "Whatever." She shrugged. "You know what I mean." I looked toward my parents. Surely they would say something. Anything. Instead, my father set down his fork. His expression was cold, almost businesslike. "You need to figure things out." "I am figuring things out." "No," his voice sharpened. "You're avoiding reality." The words hit harder than I expected, because they weren't coming from Ethan or Madison. They were coming from the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who used to tell me I could accomplish anything. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly. Dad leaned back. "I want you to stop depending on us." The room fell silent. For a moment I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even understand what was happening. Then Mom finally looked up. For a second, I thought she was about to defend me. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe your father is right." That hurt more than anything else. My own mother. The woman who used to stay awake all night when I was sick. The woman who promised family would always stand together. Now, she couldn't even look me in the eye. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you the most, subscribe to Legacy Whisper. Some stories aren't just about heartbreak. They're about discovering your true worth after everyone else forgets it. I pushed my chair back. "Fine." Dad frowned. "Fine what? You want me gone?" Nobody answered, and that silence gave me my answer. I stood up. "Got it." Mom finally looked uncomfortable. "Daniel, don't be dramatic." I almost laughed. Dramatic? I had lost my job, lost my apartment, lost my financial stability, and now was losing my family. But somehow I was the dramatic one. Ethan crossed his arms. "You're a grown man." "Yeah," I nodded slowly. "I am." Then I walked upstairs. Nobody followed me. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody tried to stop me. I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags, a few clothes, my laptop, old photographs, and a small wooden box containing letters from my grandfather, the only family member who had ever truly understood me. Grandpa Walter. He'd passed away 2 years earlier. Back then, losing him felt like losing my best friend. Now, realized it had been much worse than that. I carried my bags downstairs. My parents were still sitting at the table, watching, waiting, as if they expected me to argue, beg, cry. Instead, I walked straight to the front door. My hand touched the handle. Then my mother's voice stopped me. For one brief second, hope returned. Maybe she would tell me to stay. Maybe she would remember I was her son. but her next words destroyed that hope completely. "Leave your house key." I froze. Slowly, I removed the key from my pocket, placed it on the hallway table, and walked out. No hugs. No apologies. No goodbye. Just silence. The kind of silence that changes a person forever. That night, I slept in my car, or at least what used to be my car. A friend had loaned me an old pickup truck for job interviews. The driver's seat barely reclined. The heater barely worked. Outside, rain hammered against the windshield. Inside, I stared into darkness, wondering how my life had collapsed so quickly. But around 3 in the morning, something happened. My phone vibrated, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Then a voicemail appeared. The message was only 23 seconds long, and after I listened to it, my entire world changed. Because the caller wasn't asking for money, wasn't offering a job, wasn't a debt collector. The voice said something that made absolutely no sense, something impossible, something connected to my late grandfather, and before sunrise, I would discover a secret my family had spent years trying to keep hidden from me. I replayed the voicemail 3 times before I was convinced I had heard it correctly. The voice belonged to a woman, professional, calm, precise. "Mr. Daniel Carter, my name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm calling from Lawson and Pierce Legal Group. We need to speak with you regarding the estate of Walter Carter. Please contact us as soon as possible. This matter is time sensitive." I stared at the phone. The estate of Walter Carter, my grandfather, a man who had died 2 years earlier. None of it made sense. I almost convinced myself it was a scam. Then I noticed the area code. It was local, and the law firm's name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Because I remembered seeing their representatives at my grandfather's funeral, sleep became impossible. By sunrise, I was sitting outside a coffee shop waiting for it to open so I could charge my phone and call the number back. My hands shook as I dialed. The same woman answered, "Lawson and Pierce. This is Daniel Carter." There was a brief pause. Then her tone changed immediately. "Mr. Carter, we've been trying to reach you. What is this about? I'm afraid that's something our attorney needs to discuss with you in person." My stomach tightened. "Is there a problem?" "Actually, Mr. Carter, there may have been a very significant mistake." A mistake. Those words echoed in my head for hours. At 10 o'clock that morning, I walked into the law office wearing the same wrinkled clothes I'd slept in. The receptionist smiled politely. A few minutes later, a tall man with gray hair approached. "Daniel?" "Yes, I'm Richard Pierce." We shook hands. He led me into a conference room. Several thick folders sat on the table. The moment I saw my grandfather's name printed across one of them, my pulse accelerated. Richard sat down, then he looked directly at me. "Before we begin, I need to ask you a question." "Okay, when was the last time you spoke to your family?" I laughed bitterly. "Last night." "Recently?" "They kicked me out." His expression changed. Not surprise, almost concern, as if he suddenly understood something. "I see. What is going on?" He opened one of the folders. Inside were documents, signatures, legal records, letters. Then he slid a single page across the table. My eyes locked on the heading, "Last Will and Testament of Walter James Carter." I stopped breathing. Richard pointed toward a paragraph. "Please read that section." I leaned forward. At first the words barely registered. Then I reached my own name, Daniel Carter. I read it again. Then a third time. A heart slammed against my chest. "No." It remained silent. "This can't be right." "I'm afraid it is." I looked up. Confused. Terrified. Completely lost. "My grandfather left everything to me?" Richard nodded. "Yes. Everything. Not part of his estate. Not a percentage. Everything. The house. The land, investments, savings accounts, business interests. Everything." I stared at the page. The amount was almost impossible to comprehend. Millions. Not thousands. Millions. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Why didn't I know about this? Richard sighed. Then he removed another document. "Because this will was never presented." The words hit me like a truck. "What 2 years ago, another version was submitted. My mind raced. What are you saying? Richard folded his hands. I'm saying someone concealed your grandfather's final will. A chill traveled down my spine. Suddenly, every memory of the funeral came rushing back. The strange tension, the whispered conversations, the way Ethan kept disappearing during family gatherings afterward, the way my father avoided discussing Grandpa's estate. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Now, every detail felt different, dangerous. What happened to the money? I asked quietly. Richard hesitated, then he answered. It was distributed among other family members. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Family took it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke it. The insults, the humiliations, the key on the abe. Why see Oster, there is as instantly mad something else. Words instantly made my stomach drop. Had N. According to the records. Yes. The room fell silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I thought about the previous night. The insults, the humiliation, the key on the hallway table, the way they looked at me like I was worthless, all while hiding a secret that could have changed my entire life. My grandfather had left everything to me, and somehow, they had stolen it. Richard opened another folder. There is something else. The words instantly made my stomach drop. What now? He slid a handwritten letter across the table. The moment I saw the handwriting, tears filled my eyes. I recognized it immediately. Grandpa, Walter, every birthday card, every Christmas note, every letter he'd ever written looked exactly the same. Richard nodded. He wanted you to have this. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. The date at the top showed it had been written 3 weeks before his death. I began reading, and before I reached the end of the first paragraph, tears were already running down my face, because my grandfather had known exactly what was coming, and he had left behind a warning about someone in the family, a warning so shocking that it would completely change how I saw my parents, Ethan and Madison, forever. And the name written in that letter was the last name I expected to see. I stared at my grandfather's letter for several seconds before continuing. The paper felt fragile in my hands, almost as if it had been waiting years for this exact moment. I swallowed hard and kept reading. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. I pray that I'm wrong, but I've lived long enough to recognize greed when I see it. There are people in this family who care more about money than love, more about appearances than honesty, and if my final wishes are ignored, you'll know exactly who they are. I stopped. My heart was pounding. Richard sat quietly across from me. He had clearly read the letter before I continued. You've always wondered why I spent so much time with you. The truth is simple. You were the only one who never wanted anything from me. Everyone else asked for money, favors, opportunities, or influence. You only asked for my time. Tears blurred my vision. Memories flooded back. Fishing trips, long drives, weekends repairing old furniture in his garage, while everyone else talked about his wealth. I had simply enjoyed being with him. Our grandfather continued. I need you to know something important. The greatest disappointment of my life was not a business failure. It was watching certain members of my family become people I barely recognized. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Then, I reached the next paragraph, and everything changed. If anyone attempts to interfere with this will, pay special attention to Ethan. I froze. The room became silent, completely silent. Even Richard seemed to be studying my reaction. Ethan, my brother, not my father, not my mate, not Madison. Ethan, read the line again. Then again. The words remained the same. What does this mean? I asked. Richard leaned forward. We've been investigating that question ourselves. Investigating? He nodded. After the original attorney handling your grandfather's estate retired, certain inconsistencies were discovered. My pulse accelerated. What inconsistencies? Richard opened another folder. Inside were bank statements, emails, property transfers, documents I couldn't begin to understand. But one thing immediately stood out. Ethan's name appeared everywhere. Everywhere. My mouth went dry. No. Richard nodded slowly. Your brother was heavily involved in the estate process. I couldn't believe it. Ethan worked in finance. He always bragged about being successful, about understanding money better than everyone else, about being smarter than the rest of us. Growing up, he constantly reminded me that he would accomplish more than I ever could. But fraud, theft, manipulating our grandfather's will? That was different. That was criminal. What exactly did he do? I asked. Richard hesitated. At this stage, we don't have definitive proof. But we believe someone intentionally prevented the final will from being filed. A chill ran through my body. Because suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. The expensive house Ethan bought shortly after Grandpa died. The luxury SUV. The vacations. The constant bragging about investments. Back then I assumed he was simply successful. Now, I wasn't so sure. What happens next? Richard folded his hands. Legally, we're petitioning the court. How long? Months. The answer hit hard. For several seconds, neither of us spoke it. The insults, the humiliations, the key on the abayc oster, there is s instantly mad something else. Words instantly made my stomach drop. Hatharn. Months. I had nowhere to live. No stable income. Almost no money. And now, I was discovering that my family might have stolen my future. It felt unreal. As if life had waited until I hit rock bottom before revealing the truth. Then Richard handed me a business card. There's someone else you should meet. I looked down. The card belonged to a private investigator named Sarah Mitchell. Why? I asked. Richard leaned forward. Because your grandfather hired her before he died. A chill ran through me. A few hours later, I sat across from Sarah in a small downtown office. Without saying much, she placed a thick folder on the desk. Your grandfather suspected something was wrong, she said. He asked me to keep an eye on Ethan. My stomach tightened. Sarah opened the folder. Inside were photographs, bank records, emails, documents. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture began to emerge. My father and Ethan had been meeting privately about Grandpa's finances long before he passed away, and after his death, the final version of the will mysteriously disappeared. The more evidence I saw, the harder it became to deny the truth. They knew, maybe not every detail, but they knew enough, and they chose to stay silent. That night, I sat alone in my motel room, staring at the ceiling. Not because of the money, because of the betrayal. The people who should have protected me had become the people who hurt me most. But something changed inside me that night. For months, I had felt like a victim. Not anymore. I decided I would fight. Not for revenge. For the truth. The next year became the hardest year of my life. I worked every job I could find. Warehouse shifts, delivery routes, construction, cleanup. Anything that paid the bills. During the day, I worked. At night, I met with attorneys and investigators. Slowly, the case grew stronger. Then life surprised me. A logistics company offered me a position in another city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a fresh start. I accepted immediately. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. I moved, started over, worked harder than ever. And little by little, everything changed. Months became years. Promotions came, responsibilities increased. My confidence returned. The same man my family called a failure was now leading teams and managing major operations. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and every new discovery made things worse for Ethan and my father. Then one afternoon, my attorney called. His voice sounded different, serious, focused. Daniel, he said. We found a witness. My heart pounded. Who? There was a long pause. Then he answered, your mother. I couldn't believe it. My mother? The same woman who watched me leave? The same woman who asked for my house key. A week later, I flew back home. When I saw her, she looked exhausted, older, broken. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she whispered two words, "I'm sorry." Years of pain flooded back instantly, but I listened, and finally, she told me everything. The night before Grandpa died, he had shown her the real will, the final will, the one that left everything to me. He was afraid someone would interfere, and sadly, he was right. After his death, pressure came from Ethan and my father. The original will disappeared. An older version was used instead, and my mother stayed silent. Not because she agreed, because she was afraid. Fear destroyed her, and it nearly destroyed me. When she finished speaking, tears filled her eyes. "I should have protected you." I looked at her for a long moment, then I said something simple. "You should have." There was nothing else to say. The damage was already done. Months later, the case finally reached court. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, financial records, witness testimony. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The truth had been buried. But not forever. The day of the ruling, the courtroom was silent. The judge reviewed every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. Then he delivered his decision. My grandfather's final will was declared valid. The estate would be redistributed according to his true wishes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, because the truth had finally won. Across the room, Ethan looked stunned. My father stared at the floor. Years of deception had finally caught up with them. The court also uncovered financial misconduct connected to family assets. Additional penalties followed. Reputations collapsed. Relationships shattered. Everything they tried to protect was lost. After the hearing, my father approached me. For the first time in my life, he looked defeated. "I was wrong," he said quietly. Those words carried years of regret, years of pride, years of mistakes. I looked at him and realized something important. Holding onto anger wouldn't change the past. It would only poison the future. So I nodded. Not because everything was forgiven, but because I was finally ready to move forward. Later, my mother found me outside the courthouse. "I don't deserve another chance," she said. "No," I answered honestly. "You don't." Tears filled her eyes. "But thank you for finally telling the truth." And for the first time in years, we hugged. Not because everything was fixed, because healing has to begin somewhere. Over time, of my grandfather's estate was recovered. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to honor his wishes, enough to create opportunities, enough to build something meaningful. I launched my own business, then another. Both succeeded, but the greatest gift wasn't financial freedom. It was understanding my grandfather's final lesson. Character matters more than wealth, integrity matters more than appearances, and truth always matters. 5 years later, I visited Grandpa Walter's grave. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. I sat beside his headstone and thanked him for believing in me when nobody else did. Before leaving, I opened a final letter he had left behind. The last line stayed with me forever. "I was never proud of you because of what you achieved. I was proud of you because of who you are." Read those words again and smiled. Because I finally understood. My story was never about losing everything. It was about discovering what could never be taken from me, my worth. And sometimes life doesn't give us justice immediately. Sometimes it takes years. But truth has a way of finding its way home. And when it does, it changes everything.